Welcome to the City. I'm Anthony Wilson, the Public Information Officer for the City of San Angelo. And joining us today for the whole episode is our newly elected council member from Single Member District 5, Elizabeth Grindstaff. Liz, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Anthony.
Now, for folks who may not know you, you were elected on May the 10th. You'll be sworn in on May the 20th. Share a little bit of your background and what you'd like people to know about you.
Well, I think a lot of people in the community know me as a former city employee. I was employed for the city for about 8 years. I came to San Angelo as the city's planning director and then was promoted to assistant city manager and was over areas of planning, community development, airport, and public information, the area that you work in. Prior to that, I had worked in 4 other Texas cities. I did a graduate internship with the city of Dallas, then was the Director of Economic Development for the city of Hillsborough, small city north of Waco, south of Dallas-Fort Worth on I-35. Received a lot of experience there that I said the city manager and the public works director and the police chief didn't do. I kind of took everything else. Left Hillsborough and went to the city of Bryan. I actually arrived in Bryan and worked for a nonprofit that the city funded, and then wrote an application for our city to become a Main Street city. And we were one of the first urban Main Street cities in the state of Texas, being the city of Bryan. So I worked there for about 4 years and then was ready for a promotion or doing something a little bit different. And then went to the city of Abilene, where I believe you and I met. I arrived in Abilene as the city's downtown development director, and then eventually went into planning, which is really more my educational background, and worked in that area and became kind of a more traditional comprehensive planner and then planning administrator. And I was a planning director, interim planning director there for about 7 months before the opportunity came to interview in San Angelo. Someone that had worked for me in Bryan was Rick Wise. He was doing a student internship while I was working for the city, and we'd always stayed in loose touch. And he called me and said, "Hey, would you ever consider San Angelo?" And it was kind of at the right time for me and my family, and came down, interviewed, and really fell in love with the city.
So you retired from municipal life in 2012, and prior to that, you'd worked for about 20 years in municipal government.
24 years.
So what was it that initially drew you to this sort of work?
I don't know. I mean, do we ever really know? I think that, I think you know a little bit about my education, but I started out in architecture. And architecture is extremely competitive, and at the time it was a field that had no jobs in Texas, but I loved architecture. And really what I loved about it was sort of the built community. And I was exposed to planning while I was in doing my bachelor's work in my 4-year program. And I kind of moved that way. And so whether it's historic preservation, community revitalization, I like community building. And so I followed that path, and that's been kind of a consistent thread through the work that I've done. Now,
when you left our employment, did you ever imagine that you would be running for city council?
No. And I think it's funny because I would say that you as a staff person would say to yourself, gosh, if I was sitting up there, I would have done this differently. I mean, you watch every council meeting second by second. And so I think we all have that little game that we play, in our minds that if I was there, I would do this differently. But, in truth, it was never my path. It was never my plan.
So why did you run?
Well, when I left the city, I went to work for Texas Pacifico Railroad, which has been a very good experience. And I really have enjoyed learning something completely different and being in private sector. But I think, I truly have, I don't know if it's a heart of service or the mind for service, public service. So people started talking to me about doing this. And I thought that was just crazy, because I could always think of other people maybe in my district that I would think might have an interest before my own. And so I would say, oh, I'm sure there are others who have dreamed about this. And certainly I wouldn't want to get in their way. And then I realized there really wasn't any other name coming up, and more people were talking to me. And so I spoke to the president of our company, and he was very encouraging. And then I sort of allowed myself the thought that well, maybe this is something I could do, and it connects me back to the public service that I had been involved in on a volunteer basis, because I have no intention, of leaving Texas Pacifica or leaving the career that I've begun. But I think my knowledge, my experience, and my education is very suited for a council position. I just never allowed myself truly to think about that before.
So aside just from the opportunity to serve, were there any issues in particular that you felt compelled to run on?
No, I'm not coming here with any, preconceived agenda, not at all. I think that I know the staff very well. I understand local government and the parameters in which we work, in the sense of what a council's authority is, what staff's authority is, what the local government code says. And so I think that it might be easier for me than other candidates, but I didn't come with a list of things that had to be fixed or that needed to be, in the forefront. I think that my interests are pretty typical, and after you campaign with these candidates, I believe there were seven of us or seven others, that you realize that you all have similar interests. There are kind of things glaring that we all think that need to be addressed, but I don't think they're unique to me.
So 24 years of experience in municipal government, that wealth of knowledge about how municipal government works in general and in San Angelo specifically, how do you think that's going to help you at the council table?
I would hope that I could be influential in having some of the work that's been going on put back on staff, in the sense of we need to look at our staff as experts in their area. If they're not, we shouldn't have hired them, or we need to help give them the tools to be the experts, whether that's training, other exposures. But we pay them a wage to do a job that's, very well articulated through performance measurements, and we need to expect that out of them. I think there's been some micromanagement by the council that has not been particularly fruitful for the community as a whole, and I think that I can sort of help redefine the lines, or certainly I would like to do that, but in a way, as we were talking earlier, in building consensus, not being divisive, but helping others to understand the role of a council that is a volunteer council versus paid professionals.
Do you think that all your insider knowledge in any way could be a hindrance for you as a council member?
Well, I think that that's something that I'm going to have to be very aware of. But as I've said over and over and over again, I have a full-time job, and it's a position that I'm still learning. So, truthfully, I still have to give a lot of, brain power to my primary position. So my interest is not to come here and to challenge every detail of the work. It's to come here in a position of a policymaker.
Of course, as you know, and most San Angeloans know, street maintenance is a big issue for our community right now. How do you go about tackling an issue of that size with the enormity of the cost that'll be involved?
Well, I think street maintenance is like several other cost centers that we have. Infrastructure is a struggle for, I would say, most every community in Texas of a certain age. And if you look around the country, a lot of our cities, mid-size or larger, are having the same problems. But I think we have to really look at core services and how we fund them. And I'm not a big proponent of the use of half-cent sales tax for that purpose, because I don't think that was the intention of half-cent sales tax. I believe that street maintenance, again, is one of those core services, and it needs to be funded appropriately on an annual basis. And to defer maintenance really leaves you with an exponential problem, in later years. And I don't think we have properly addressed that.
You say you are not supportive of dedicating a portion of the half-cent sales tax for economic development to street maintenance. Talk a little bit more about that. Why do you think it's important to keep those funds sort of where they are and doing what they're doing?
Well, and in saying that, you realize I was elected just several days ago. I have not had any meetings with my district, but my sort of first reaction is that kind of expenditure is not what the half-cent tax was designed for. I don't personally believe that it was. And that's part of the reason, of course, you have to go back to the ballot and have the community vote on it. But I believe that the half-cent sales tax should be used for above and beyond type projects. And that, our sales tax and our property tax, in the sense of how it funds the general fund, it's the general fund that should be funding street maintenance, like many of the other core services of the city. And then we have to decide as a community what we're willing to pay every year for that. And if that need is growing, and I think it is, because we have been in a deferral type situation here, then we're going to need to look at perhaps cutting other services that may be served by other parts of the community.
Of course, as you know, water is our big issue here in San Angelo. What do you think of the efforts thus far to supplement our surface water supply?
I think that the efforts that have gone on so far have been appropriate, and I think they've been very prudent. I think the Hickory is a good project, and I remember when our consultants and Will Wilde were presenting, the different sources several years ago, and we talked about the pros and cons, the treatment that was necessary, and ultimately what the cost per gallon of that water was. And so I believe that the Hickory was a good project. I think that when you look at Nasworthy and our other surface water opportunities, Ivy, etc., that's kind of like one piece in our water portfolio. And so the Hickory then gives us the aquifer. We don't necessarily have the same evaporative issues that we do with the surface water. But now what's the next piece? Is it more surface development? I think the Red Arroyo project is a good project to study. But in the end, I think, truly our long-term answer is something that complements the aquifer and the surface supply.
We're talking with Councilwoman-elect Elizabeth Grindstaff, and we'll be back in a moment, but first we're going to spotlight another outstanding city employee, our water quality lab technician, Charmaine Moss.
My name is Charmaine Moss. I'm a water quality laboratory technician, and I've been working for the city for 3 months. I explained to them that the different sections I work is for the water quality tap water, the wastewater, and bacteriological section. And they're really excited because they want to know what I do, which is play with water and poop all day. We're testing the tap water to make sure the chlorine levels are fine, total hardness, alkalinity, make sure everything is good to drink. For wastewater, we make sure about the percentage of the total solids, BODs, CODs, TSSs, and to make sure it's good to use as compost. We make sure that there's no E. coli and chloroform in our tap water, which is our main concern. Make sure that the chlorine levels are perfect. The tap water is here where I work. We collect Ivy, and then we have a north, middle, and south plant for our tap water holds. My prior career was I was in the United States Air Force. I was in the medical laboratory. I was assigned to Goodfellow as a military training leader, and I've been here for 6 years. All the techniques of how I use the beakers, bleakers, the ovens, everything that I used to do in the military as a medical laboratory tech is basically the same, except now I'm working with tap water instead of human blood. I love it. I love everybody that I work with. We all get along great. If one is missing, we all just jump in and try and help each other out. I love knowing that I can provide great tap water to our San Angelo people. The most interesting thing about my job is I've never worked with human feces before. So seeing how it works, how it goes through a process to become compost and then used throughout our San Angelo lands for crops and everything. The first thing I say is at least we have water, And the second thing is I tell them it's going to be okay because I'm here and I'm taking care of it. Making sure that everything goes fine with the tap water for our city. And if that works out well, then that's a success for me. I was born in New York, Queens, and raised in Houston, Texas. I was at Randolph Air Force Base, of course Lackland. I was stationed in Spangdahlem, Germany, where I had my twin daughters. Then I was stationed at Eglin Air Force Base, Duke Field in Florida, and then Shepherd Air Force Base here in Texas. Then Scott Air Force Base in Illinois, and Goodfellow Air Force Base. I love San Angelo. It's not fast-paced like Houston. Everybody's so nice. Everybody gets along. There's no traffic. And I just love the place. There's things that we can do here. And I think it's a great place to raise a family. A good day away from work. I love to hunt. Right now I built my first big girl playhouse. It's my deer blind. It's pink camo with black. And another good thing is spending time with my twin daughters, my husband Chris, and usually with my friends and my military family. A good day at work is if everything goes fine. All the results are perfect, no problems, no water line breaks, so that would be a good thing for me.
We are continuing our conversation with Elizabeth Grindstaff, the newest member of our City Council representing single-member District 5. We're talking about water. You mentioned that you think there's some other options to enhance our water portfolio aside from the Red Arroyo project. Do you have anything specific in mind?
Well, I've always been interested in reclaimed water and in the use of that. In Abilene, there was a big move when we were still living in the city there to do that. And Abilene has an ongoing reclamation project. I understand that Big Spring does. Other cities around the state have been involved with this for 20 plus years. Our own city has done a study on it, but to my knowledge, it's never fully been presented or investigated, and maybe until recently only been discussed. So I think that we need to look at that. I know that's one of those things that everybody kind of goes, oh, but I think when you look at the science behind it and how it has evolved, whether you're looking at what's going on in the U.S. with reclaimed water or effluent water or around the world, it's a very reliable source.
What do you think about the efforts with the West Texas Water Partnership working with Midland and Abilene in order to try to develop some regional water sources?
I think that's always a good idea, but I just want to make sure that San Angelo receives their portion, and it's a fair portion of the results of that study.
Of course, as we're taping this, we have about 12 and a half months of available water supply. When we get to less than 12 months, drought level 3 is enacted where we prohibit all outside watering. If that should occur, would you be in favor of allowing any sort of exceptions to those watering restrictions?
I think the only exceptions that should be allowed are those that benefit the entire population. I think there are businesses that we would have to seriously consider limiting or cutting off, I think is probably what you're thinking. And I have friends that have car washes, for instance. And I think when we get to the point where we all truly believe that we have less than a year's supply with no weather change predicted, that even they can understand the severity of the problem.
When you talk about an exception that would benefit the community as a whole, do you have something specific in mind?
No, I'm not sure what that would be. I don't know if that's a new park, like a new park construction. But I don't think right now we're in a park development mode. We've done many in the last several years. So I'm just thinking what that might be. And I don't really think of anything that in particular that comes to mind. But I think that we would have to be very, very judicious with those decisions. And again, it'd be something that really meets a very high standard of public benefit. And I don't think that certain businesses would. I think that once we get to that point, we're in a very dire situation, and it's time to make the very difficult decisions.
Is there anything that city government should do to incentivize or maybe even mandate water conservation?
Oh, I believe we should. I mean, I think that if you look at the area that we live in, and weather patterns can certainly change, but I don't think there's any real change that we can expect from West Texas. We see these cycles, whether you go back to the Dust Bowl or you look at just the cycles of the last 10 and 20 years, I think we need to be much more prudent in the use of our water. I think we need to really look at it as a resource that has limitation, and I think we need to start behaving as such. So I don't think the answer is always acquiring more water rights in the sense of, do we need limitless water here? Well, wouldn't that be nice, but can we afford it? You asked me before about streets. How can we fund everything? I think we need to learn to live within our means.
There has been some criticism on the city's social media about us continuing to issue construction permits given our serious water supply issues. Do you think that the city should be putting the brakes on local development?
Absolutely not. I think local development, in the sense of growing the tax base, is what helps fund the necessary infrastructure projects that we need, whether it's water, streets, stormwater, you pick it, enhanced police protection later on. So no, I'm not at all for limiting permits for construction related to commercial development or even residential development. But I think as those developments move forward, what is the right incentives for those developments to use less water? And I think that really is sort of the obvious conversation.
You mentioned earlier you came to the City of San Angelo as our planning director, so you know full well the criticism that our planners sometimes get for not always...
Absolutely not, Anthony. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, some people complain that they should be allowed to do whatever they want to with their property, which I wanted you to sort of explain why you think planning is crucial to a community.
Well, I think that everyone would like to think that no rules apply to them and that they all have, the greatest community interests at heart. But generally when we're acting alone, we're taking care of ourselves or the interests of our immediate family. When you live in a city, in a community, I think we all give up certain rights in order to live peacefully together in close proximity to one another. So in planning as a profession, you're taught a variety of different sort of professions. It's very interdisciplinary. And so what I mean by that is you understand firefighting and police protection and the importance of park development or the walkability of a neighborhood. So it's really all of these things together, melded together to help you understand in general terms how to more effectively design a community that protects the tax base and protects the majority of rights of our citizens and allows them to sort of peacefully coexist with their neighbors. And so, again, when you talk about zoning, that's something where people go, oh my gosh, that's the craziest thing in the world. Imagine what it would be like to live with absolutely no development law, where you could live next door to a 24-hour radiator shop, and that's not even the worst. I mean, we used to always say in planning, the rendering plant, or whatever it is that should to some degree be segregated from a residential area, or should be segregated for safety reasons from an elementary school. So it really is kind of like peeling the onion, I think, to understand planning. But it really is meant to be in the best interest of the community as a whole.
You mentioned that you were once the downtown manager in Abilene, where I was the City Hall reporter at the time. That's where we first met. So you obviously have a hand and have had a hand in downtown revitalization here in San Angelo as well. What do you think of the Downtown Master Development Plan?
Well, I would, to be fair to all of those that are involved, my hand has been less involved than others. But the Downtown Master Plan was a critical component of our comprehensive plan update. And really what I think it does as a whole for the city is to say this is our historic city center, and we're very interested in seeing redevelopment here that is sensitive to the history and the architecture of the place, because this place is very unique to San Angelo. Abilene's downtown does not look like this. Lubbock's downtown does not look like this. So we want to protect what we have, the uniqueness of it, but we want to see redevelopment. In the long term, it's much more cost effective for the city to incent redevelopment at the core rather than to allow development on the fringe. Because as that infrastructure continues to get pulled away from the core, it just becomes more expensive to maintain that over time if our population is not growing really at the same rate. So I'm all for downtown revitalization. I'm all for downtown reinvestment, and I would like to see incentives continue to that end.
Is there anything in particular you'd like to see happen downtown, and how aggressively do you think that should be pursued?
Well, I think if you talk to the people who have been very instrumental in our downtown revitalization effort, Brenda Gunner and others, and anyone that works in revitalization throughout our state, downtown living is, I think, a critical component for that really healthy downtown. Then certain businesses come in and support that, and it's kind of a symbiotic relationship. But downtown housing in some of our kind of our bigger empties, I think, is very important. And I think we need to do what we can to sort of tip the scales to make that attractive to developers. And I think in the end, that's when we will be most successful. But I'm very proud of our downtown. And again, I think if you look at the other places that I've worked, just from my perspective, I think we have a very healthy downtown. And that's because of the efforts of a lot of entities and a lot of very selfless individuals.
We've got about a minute left. I wanted to ask you about one other big plan that's lurking out there, and that is the Lake Nasworthy Development Plan. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say that I'm cautious about how much we do or what we do in the next year or so with that plan. You know, I'm optimistic that we'll pull out of the drought and that maybe we'll return to some some rains. But truly, I'm a believer that Lake Nasworthy is one of our greatest assets in our community and our region. We know how many people it draws, you know, from Midland and Ector County as just for instance. And so I think it's a real opportunity for us to develop and have a stronger tax base for the city, really exploit some of the attributes of the lake area, even when we don't have quite the capacity of water in it that we want. So I think that we should move forward in a rather cautious fashion, though.
And the caution is all due because of the lake levels at the moment?
Right. I think that it's kind of ridiculous to think that all of a sudden it's going to develop overnight. But I think that we still need to be proactive in promoting that planning activity.
We've been talking with our new Councilwoman, Elizabeth Grindstaff, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode of The City.